I'm November Champion. I run our accessibility program here at Wells Fargo Advisors. So my day job consists of reminding designers and developers, people building all of our websites and our digital content, to keep remembering about people with disabilities as they do their daily job. I actually have a lot of great colleagues here, so my job is usually pretty easy. I just have to remind them, or sometimes they talk about me as if I'm not there and try to judge what I'm going to say, and they're actually getting pretty good at it. So eventually I'll work myself out of a job, which is actually the goal. So we're going to talk a little bit about like website design. Do not worry that you are not website designers. We're also going to look at examples of good design and examples of bad design. And you will discover that instinctually, you know what is most accessible just by judging two things looking at them. You may not know why it's more accessible, but there's such a strong tie to accessibility and whether a website is usable or understandable by most people that it just makes sense. It's just thinking about that additional layer. And then we'll talk through, why those work. But the highlight of the show today is definitely the stations. So I'll leave time for that. So what we mean by web accessibility. So for me, accessibility means making sure that information, and for my particular job, electronic, online, digital content, is available and usable by people with disabilities. We'll talk about these in a second, but there's a couple images on this slide. One is of a woman using something that's sort of similar to what Christy will use. She's using a document camera to actually magnify a document. If you see, the document is yellow on the screen and bigger, but the document itself is actually white. And so that's a contrast theme that can change and make things look easier for her. She's also got a large screen calculator and keyboard, and she has her trusty guide dog laying on the floor trying to behave, I'm sure. And then color blindness dots. So don't be worried if you can't see those. Those are on a computer screen. You're supposed to be able to see numbers if you are not colorblind, but this is not an accurate representation. I actually have had presentations where people will email me after and go, was I supposed to be able to see numbers? And I was like, yes, but don't be alarmed. Here, take this test. And then one of them's like, oh, I didn't see numbers there either. And I was like, yeah, you should go to the doctor. And I just want to talk a little bit about why we care about accessibility here, because this is basically the reasons why you might care about it. And they probably apply to your organization too, except for maybe the first one. So part of the work that I do is governed by an enterprise mandate at the Wells Fargo level. So Wells Fargo is a really big company. I'm certainly not the only team of people doing my job here. There's probably 30 of us, if not more. People like me that are situated throughout other different lines of business. So like home lending and credit card and the community bank. I do the space where individual investors have access to their accounts. So that's kind of the space I focus on. But we have that enterprise mandate because we actually went through a regulatory action with the Department of Justice. So back in 2012, we got approached by the Department of Justice because someone had complained to them that they called into our hotline and we didn't take a relay call, which is a call for somebody who's deaf. It was actually this weird blip that fixed itself in 2 weeks. Some compliance person thought that we shouldn't be talking to relay operators. They were quickly educated and fixed, but that was enough time for the Department of Justice to come after us. And one of the things that we agreed to was to increase our focus on website accessibility as a result. There's always the risk of lawsuits and complaints in this space. You guys are a smaller target than we are. We're big, monolith. Wells Fargo, we're a bigger target, so we attract kind of more attention. So maybe we're a little more focused on that than you would be per se. But you do have, I was actually just talking to somebody at LouFest, and they had accessibility complaints last year about the LouFest experience. So it is possible for you to have complaints about your website. And I will say the disability segment is a very loyal and connected segment. And I bet Stephen could talk about this at length as well. So there's some reputational risk there too. So if you have a good experience, people will hear about it. And if you have a bad experience, people will hear about it. There's also this concept. I mean, this is a really young room, so I know that this is going to be new for you. But as you age, your body changes, and you might acquire some disabilities. This magic thing happens when you turn 40-ish, and I will just warn you, sometimes it's like really sudden, that you'll all of a sudden need reading glasses. Like literally, I worked at an eye doctor's office when I was in college, not because I was good at it, but because they needed people. I was very bad at the instruments and the blood and all that stuff. But people would come in 2 weeks after their 40th birthday and go, I can't read restaurant menus anymore. And so I'd like flip open their chart. I'd look and I'm like, oh, happy birthday. And also you have presbyopia. And they're like, how do you know? You didn't even look at me. Well, it's because you turned 40. It's an everybody thing. It's not like just going to happen to some people. So we have our climate is a little, or our target audience is a little older, so that's something that's of concern for us and probably of concern for you too. Donors tend to be older, so like as you're attracting those. And then generally, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but improving accessibility improves usability for everybody. A lot of the things that we'll talk about today, and you'll see as everybody's demoing for you, is that good design also is accessible design. They're very strongly correlated. And so if you want a website that is attractive and easy for people to find the information they want, accessibility ties into that as well. And generally, I just believe it's the right thing to do, and hopefully you do too. So like I mentioned for us, here, even if we didn't care about our clients with disabilities and none of those things were compelling to me, it's certainly about aging for us. Over 90% of our clients are over the age of 50. So our clients are older. Yeah, like it takes a while to acquire the money that you need. So eventually you get your advisor and you're a little older. And for our advisors here and like our team members, this is like an industry thing. It's actually not a Wells Fargo Advisors thing. The mean age of financial advisors and client advisors or client associates, which are our people out in the field providing advice to people and helping them with their portfolios. The mean age here is 50, but this is an industry sort of thing. There will be lots of careers in the financial services industry as the baby boomers all retire. And so since those vision changes start at 40, this is something that's like super relevant for us here. So let's talk a little bit about how people with disabilities access the web. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because you're going to actually see it and feel it. So me describing it is not as relevant. But there are lots of types of disabilities. Like I have celiac disease, which means that I can't eat gluten. But that doesn't impact how I use a computer or mobile device. I don't need any assistive technology other than just not eating gluten. So there's the ones that are impacted by how somebody might use a computer and mobile device fall kind of into 4 buckets. We'll have 3 stations today that are focused on visual, both like vision loss and total vision loss, color blindness, low vision, which is not really a real medical term, but is kind of a conglomeration of things. The reason we have maybe more visual stations than the other are because the web is a visual medium. And so there are different types of assistive technologies to help make that experience whole. Hearing disabilities. So Wendy might have been one of the people that escorted you up. She's on my team. And she lost hearing in her right ear just a couple years ago, really suddenly. So there are things that we do for her when we accommodate for her on a website design. And then mobility disabilities is a really big bucket that also includes like lots of people that might not consider themselves disabled. So Dragon is one of our stations, and that's kind of one experience. But I also have a friend who is a paralegal, and she has carpal tunnel. She would never consider herself disabled, but she uses a lot of the same assistive technologies that somebody who has a mobility disability might use. She uses Dragon, naturally speaking, to help type on days that it is painful. She has this really cool foot pedal thing that she uses as a mouse. She's also convinced that it helps her get steps on her Fitbit. I don't think that it does, but I can't correct her. But it could be anything from like quadriplegia, or it could also be something temporary, like I fell and broke my arm and I can't use my hand that I normally use with a mouse, and everything is more awkward for me. And then cognitive disabilities all kind of impact in different ways. This is a really broad bucket, but like dyslexia or autism, that sort of thing. And so there are different assistive technologies out there that help make that experience whole. So one of them being a screen reader. So Dr. Stephen Kissel is going to show, he uses JAWS, which is the most popular screen reader out there. Almost all of our clients use JAWS, with the exception of one that I have talked to. It's definitely popular. But other screen readers, like Kim will show, I think you're showing VoiceOver, perhaps? Yes. So VoiceOver is the one that comes on the iPhone. I actually use VoiceOver. Or any Apple device, yep. Laptop or tablet, it's all built in. And then Christy's going to show screen magnification, which she's going to use Zoom Text, which is also the most popular. We did a good job of recruiting most popular assistive technologies. Great job, Rachel. For hearing, there's not a specific assistive technology on the computer or mobile device. We provide captions for them, but generally the hearing aid like Wendy has is the hearing aid she has all of the time, not just for using a computer. Although she does have a really cool one that hooks up to her phone that she can pipe in a video and like be far away from her screen and still listening. For mobility, Dragon Naturally Speaking is one of those solutions, but also there could be people who only use the keyboard and don't use a mouse. They might use an alternative sort of mouse. So like my friend has these foot pedal things. There's also joysticks and switches and buttons and all kinds of things. Voice activation, that sort of thing. So it's because the category is broad, the types of things people might use would also be broad. And then for cognitive disabilities, depending on kind of when that was acquired or realized, that a person might use different types of the same things that we've just talked about. So my little brother, who is on his like 5 or 6 year college plan, not because of his disability, just because he drinks too much. So he would be horrified if I... My mom would agree with me, but he would be horrified. So he is dyslexic and he has ADHD. And so for his college experience, he actually uses a bunch of these assistive technologies to help keep him on track. He'll use Dragon Naturally Speaking to help type out a term paper so he's not overly focused on spelling, and he just gets the words out and somebody can help him edit it later. He also will occasionally use VoiceOver on his tablet if he's got a term paper to read or like a really big paper, because it draws a box around the words it's reading. And so that helps keep him focused. It's the auditory as well as the visual. There are also different assistive technologies that are specifically targeted to those, but they work kind of similarly. There might be ones, my little sister also has autism and some kind of sensory processing disorders and is very, very easily distracted. Like if you put a website in front of her that has like ads, literally all she can see is the ads. Or if you put something in front of her where there's movement, all she can see is the movement. Like there's just nothing else on the page for her but what that is. And she uses one of the ad blockers and Prettyify. I can't remember the name of the theme that like strips out all the content and just presents just the words so that she can focus. And then now that we all have mobile devices that we're carrying around with us, we can be kind of familiar with sort of temporary and situational disabilities that get experienced based on where we are or what we're doing. So disability can be a spectrum, and each of these things can be a similar sort of experience. So if you have a vision impairment that is permanent, it could be like glaucoma, that's a permanent vision impairment. But you could also experience something similar that's temporary, like getting dilated for an eye exam. I actually, since I test with Voiceover, like Kim's going to show you, on a near daily basis, when I get dilated for an eye exam, I actually use Voiceover to read my emails because I know how to use it. So it's something that's temporary for me. So situational, like you're in bright sunlight and you can't see the phone screen very well, might be similar to somebody with a visual impairment. And then also things that are unpredictable, like you have visual auras due to a migraine. So there's a large spectrum of things. Like we're talking about disability as if it's like a specific severe thing, but it's kind of all over the place. And we will come across experiences, and we'll take a look at a couple of those that'll be familiar to you just because of how you've used a mobile device. And accessibility issues are everywhere. Once you start seeing them, you will start seeing them all of the time. And I know this because the pictures on the screen are of a NFL color block football game. And they started doing this new thing where like 1 week out of the season, they would wear these really cool all one color uniforms. Someone in the NFL, of course, forgot that 10% of men are colorblind. And this first color block game aired, and the left shows you what it looks like, and the right, it has a color blindness filter on, as if you're a red-green colorblind. And if you'll see, actually to me, it looks like there are 3 different shades of gray up there. How would you ever tell which team somebody was on with those 3 different shades up there? And this is how I know that once you know about accessibility, you see them everywhere. After this game, there was a bunch of ESPN articles because the Twitter universe exploded. And there's a bunch of articles, and probably 50 people here sent me that article. Hey, did you see that NFL game last night? Here's an article about it. So we know that people notice them. And when you hear red-green color blindness, you're like, oh, that must mean you have problems seeing red and green. The chart below is actually a chart that we used to have here that has red, green, and yellow to show risk levels of different asset portfolios. And if you'll see, the red and green are not the ones that are the problem. It's actually the yellow and the green. They look almost the same if you have a color blindness condition. Oh, I was like, you can take a picture. So we're going to talk about how we include design and accessibility work by showing you some examples. This is interactive. So I will actually require you to like look at me and make an answer. I know that it is early, and as demonstrated at the first ACAC meeting, that none of you are morning people, but we're gonna power through. So, and let me explain a little bit about this too. These are wireframes. So you'll see that all of these I'm showing you are kind of black and white and gray images. Often when we start with a design, a website design, this is how we map out what we're going to do. Like we don't apply the pretty colors until towards the end. But this is how we tell like, oh, are these the right words that we're going to use? Is this the right information on the page? Is this what we're trying to do? And then we apply the colors to the top of it. But these are abstractions because they're just examples. So example A is the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. That's the text on the website. And example B is the expeditious auburn fox bounded over the languid dog. Actually got that out. So which one do you think is more accessible, A or B? A. Yeah. So this, like I told you, you're going to know more about accessibility than you think you do. That one is more accessible because of the language. So the more advanced the language, the more difficult it is for someone with a cognitive disability to understand the intent of your web content. I would argue that expeditious auburn fox is probably not language anybody should be using. But think about language choices and making something readable and clear and concise. If you really cared, this slide actually has like the specific WCAG guideline at the top. And why we're not going to talk a ton about WCAG guidelines, there are guidelines out there that govern my work. They're called WCAG. Actually, it's 2.1. It just got passed last week, and we were all surprised about how quickly that happened. WCAG 2.1. It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So those are a universal international standard. It's like a group of people that come together from businesses and corporate and academia to come up with these standards. Because of that, and because there are some lawyers involved, and I can say this because I'm a lawyer, it is not written to be understandable by any human being. Like, I've been doing this work for 10 years. I've been reading WCAG for 10 years, and there are still portions of it that don't make any sense to me. And experts disagree on what they mean. So this is why I don't go, oh, here, read this website about WCAG and you'll know exactly what you need to do, because you won't. Like, it's just not a resource that I give people. It's there. Like, it's really meant to be like legal interpretory policy language. It's not very instructional. I'll actually, I should have brought a site, but I'll send an email out that's got like all of my favorite sites. And that will have better content than WCAG will have for you. So example A is a website with gray text on a white background that is right justified. And example B has black text on a white background that is left justified. Yeah, see, Stephen doesn't even need to see these, and he knows. Shh, you're not playing into my narrative. So, yeah, obviously B. And which is not to say that you can't use gray text. You can, just not that color. And once you turn 40, your ability to perceive gray on a white background decreases. So you just want to use colors that pass. There's actually a color contrast algorithm. It's not even an objective thing or a subjective thing. You can plug in color values and it tells you whether it's accessible or not. I can't provide you like a list of accessible colors because it has to do with the background color and the color of the text. I can provide you tools to look that up, though. Yes. And so, like, we could talk about this all day, about like print and whether print should have the same. I think it's good to use it as a general guideline, but like print is also a little easier to manipulate and often doesn't have glare. So perhaps something that you use for print can have less contrast than you would have online. I still argue, and we have lots of designers here, that's like the hardest one for them to come to terms with. Like, they really, really like their gray text. And they really like pretty things that, no one can actually read. That's the hardest one for them to get past. But once they get past it, they're like, well, of course, why would I be creating a website that has content that no one can read, right? But it's getting over that hump for sure. The print piece can be a little different. I'll include resources about print design too. But yeah, the other piece about this is the justification. So, and you might see this a little with Zoom text as well. When you can't see the whole line of text at the same point and the left line is not in a predictable place, people can lose their place. It also happens with people with cognitive disabilities. I've seen my brother struggle to read right justified text. It's painful because he'll read the same line like 3 times and then he's confused and he can't figure out what he's reading. And if you want people to spend time reading that carefully crafted content on your website, you should make it so that people can read it. So example A is a video. Example B is that video has captions. I feel like I also gave you this answer earlier. And if you need help finding caption companies, like captioning is actually something that you don't have to do you can send it off to a vendor. It's not expensive. It used to be expensive. Also do a plug for audio description here as well. MindsEye has an audio description service that Rachel will you'll hear Rachel on some videos of local nonprofits, her voice specifically, with doing the audio description piece as well. And so that's making sure the captions are for people with a hearing impairment so that they can get the full text of what's going on. You can also use a transcript as well. But most of the time the video has content, or it's not just a transcript. We actually have transcripts on our site. I'm going to make Wendy talk, even though she's not paying attention. Talk about transcripts and how we use them here and what's interesting about them.
So a little backstory. I'm Wendy Mosley. I've been here with the firm 18 years. My member likes to say I started when I was a baby. Not quite true. But in a prior position with the firm, I was a web designer, and I was our web designer when we started implementing videos on the site. And I didn't have any real dog in the accessibility fight, let's say, but I knew in terms of accessibility that we should be using transcripts and captions for all our videos. So I fought for that for a long time. I eventually won. We had both captions and transcripts on our videos. I was very excited. And then a couple of years after that, I lost most of the hearing in my right ear and suddenly became my own target audience. I did not personally know anyone who was deaf or needed captions or transcripts when I started. I did not know that I was working to do something that would help my future self. So it's always a good idea, even if you don't have a personal stake in this game, you have no idea how long you have your abilities for. No one else in my family is showing any signs of losing their hearing. It continues to go. I may eventually lose all of it, but I'm super happy that I did the work that I did in the past, and it's rare that you look back on the decisions you made in your early 20s and are happy with them. I highly recommend doing this work now, because future you will thank you later.
Okay. So example A is a pretty font for the word Shazam, and example B uses real text for that Shazam word. Yeah, so it's B, but I'm not saying that you always have to use ugly text. This is actually about images. When I first started at Wells Fargo, there was a site that I noticed that will remain unnamed that had a lot of text crammed into images. And we do this even if you're not thinking about accessibility or someone who can't see that image. It happens all the time. Like you send out an invitation that's a screenshot of something, or like a picture, or a recipe that's a picture that you took with your phone, and there's not actually any text behind it. And so for somebody who is blind and using a screen reader, my developers would say, oh, for Dr. Stephen Kissel, I'm just going to add an alternative text there, and it totally covers his need. He's going to get all of the information that's in that image. The problem is that text isn't manipulatable for somebody who has low vision and wants to make the text larger, or perhaps use custom things to change the text color, like you saw in that earlier picture. So people need to be able to manipulate that text to make it readable for them. If you magnify an image with a bunch of gray text on it, it's going to become impossible to read once it gets bigger. So this is less about not using pretty colors, but more about using images intentionally for like content, and not like designing, not that I think that you would do this, but designing your website to be just images, pictures of text, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's not saying no pictures on your website, but just thinking about how you use them. So example A is a form where the labels are adjacent to the form fields. And example B, those form labels are left justified and far away. Yeah, this one's like a little harder because I just told you that Right Justified was horrible. And then you're like, November, you're lying to me. So that was about body copy. But for this one, and I know that you've experienced this filling out something on your phone before. If you filled out a form and you're like pinched to zoomed into this non-mobile optimized site and the label's way over here, but I can only see this form field and I have no idea like what radio button I need to check because I don't know what the answers are. They're way off screen. So it's a similar experience to what Christy will show you with Zoom text, where you can only see a portion of the screen at a time. And the closer you can get that label to that form field, the easier it is for somebody to be able to see it. This is also kind of a reminder to think about proximity. Like if you have a really important feature on your website, like you have this button that you want everyone to click and register, make sure that that button is actually close to the content that talks about it and not orphaned all over by itself on the right-hand side of the page where nobody can find it. Okay. Example A is a search result page where the number of the search results is the link. And example B, the title of the page is the link. Yeah, so this one's obvious because who would be able to tap one of those numbers on their phone? No one. The other piece is that people who use a screen reader often browse by pulling up lists of links. If they pull up a list of links that say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that doesn't actually tell them anything about your page. If they pull up a list of links that say click here, that also doesn't tell them much about your page. But if the links have text in them that are meaningful, that gives more information. So I think I covered most of that. Yep. So this one is kind of ugly because it is my horrible wireframing skills that make it look like it is. But imagine that A doesn't look like an Apple cover flow, but like looks like a carousel. And it has buttons on it to pause it so that it's not automatically rotating. Example B, it just automatically rotates all day long. A. Yeah. Everyone's like more cautious about this one. It's definitely A. So let's talk about motion. I think this is the thing that if you have somebody designing your site, everyone thinks of attractive and sexy websites as having lots of interactivity, right? Lots of motion, lots of cool animations. And I'm not saying that you can't do animations at all, but you want to be really thoughtful and intentional about what you do. So motion can be really distracting, like I mentioned earlier, to people with cognitive disabilities. I have seen motion recently because we actually talk about animation a lot and what is the best animation. And people are always showing me, hey, this site here, is this okay? And I was like, this site here makes me nauseous. So don't do that. You don't want people nauseous when they come to your site. That auto rotation of the carousel can actually cause a lot of issues for screen readers because it keeps jumping up to the new content as it shows up in this like continuous loop. So you just want to be thoughtful about the motion that you use. Run it by a couple people, make sure that it makes sense, that it's adding to the experience and not inhibiting it. And for anything that's continuously looping, you want to provide a way to pause or stop or hide that so that if that is something that's causing a problem for somebody, they don't have to continuously see it. I had another point, but it just fell out of my brain. That's what you're stuck with. It's almost 9. I don't even know why, but that's what you're stuck with. So example A, this is abstract, but those are like little toggles or tabs. And it's showing you that number 1, the one that you're on, has a little diamond next to it to indicate that you're on number 1. And example B is using the color blue to indicate that you're on number 1. No one ever gets this right, by the way. So the answer is A. Does anybody who answered A want to try to describe why they think it's A? You can't. So it is about sight. So you could use a color there that everybody could see. That particular shade of blue doesn't have any much contrast with white. And so some people aren't going to be able to tell the difference between that blue and white. You could pick darker color to go with a lighter color to indicate. And it's not to say that you have to use a diamond, but you want to use something that's not just color to indicate something meaningful on your site. Yeah, you could have bolded it. You could have underlined it. Could have put an additional outline around it. All kinds of different things that you could do. But just thinking about how you use color only, don't indicate that there are errors in your form fields with just the color red. Because what happens if you can't see red? So for somebody with low vision, who can't perceive that difference, this makes sense in charts to provide some additional information, whether it's text or some other indication. And then there are special things we do in the code level to indicate to screen reader users which one is selected based on the things we do behind the scenes. So now we get to go to the really fun stuff. So for the stations at the top right corner of the room is Dr. Stephen Kissel, and he'll be demoing JAWS. We're all specifically going to be looking at, except for the Dragon station, because I'm not a Dragon user. I'll be specifically looking at the St. Louis Aquarium's website, to which somebody's like, oh, the aquarium's not here yet. They actually have a one-page website. So, and they volunteered. I don't know if somebody hears from the aquarium. Oh, okay, there we go. So there we go. They volunteered, so don't be too mean. I actually haven't even looked at the site to know whether or not it's super accessible, so we'll find out. Yeah. So the actual standards that govern the work I do don't actually talk about specific fonts, but we know from research with people that when you're on the web, you want to use a sans serif font, which is the font without the nibs. Basically, because when you magnify them, it gets super distracting, like there's extra characters and stuff. But in print, a serif font, which has like the little curly sort of things when you look at it really closely, is better. I will include with an email that we will send out that has like some suggestions about font types. If you hire like a fancy web designer, they're going to have very strong feelings about font types because people have very strong feelings about font types. But just basically pick one that's like readable and not super thin. So any other questions? And we can ask questions as we go. You can always email me too. I'll have my card out.